This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Forest chump I may be, but I just can't be these rules.
They're spelled B-E-A-R.
Get it? Now, this is Janet Albrechtsen, who, she's nuts. She's a right-wing ideologue. She's written some truly unhinged pieces, particularly on Israel-Palestine of late. Been in a lot of hot water recently, getting involved in the Brittany Higgins case, colluding with the judge and stuff, like crazy stuff. But this is her
I know
being
nothing
a little
about
bit...
this person, but okay.
You don't know Janet Albrechtsen? Oh, okay.
No, this is all new to me.
She crazy. Lawyer. She was on the ABC board for a while, even though she sort of hates the ABC. She was popping up on Q&A all the time.
Okay. And she's written this article.
I wrote this piece in The Australian, yes, that was getting a lot of love online because it's extraordinary. I got lost in the forests of mountainous British Columbia. Those who jump to conclusions will put it down to me ignoring a sign that said summer boundary ends here. But here's the twist. I got lost because I've grown so accustomed to, so bored by, so immune to stupid directions, rules and regulations imposed by governments of all kinds at all levels, from mountain bureaucrats to Canberra politicians, that I thought I knew better.
Mountain bureaucrats. My least favourite kind of bureaucrat, to be sure.
The worst kind. So, look, it's too long for us to really go into detail here, but basically it's a piece about Janet ignoring a sign because signs are stupid or overregulated. We've got too many signs. Then gets lost for hours and then concludes that she was totally in the right, that we still have too many signs. If she'd read this sign, she would have got lost and she'd be totally fine. But because we have too many signs and regulations, that's why she ignored the sign and wokeness or whatever. The end.
Tom, look, knowing nothing about this Janet lady, I'm going to say I'm not necessarily not on her side, like in terms of the question of whether there are too many signs. Because there are a lot of signs. You drive along the road and there's signs everywhere. And sometimes, have you ever tried to park? You got to try to park in the city or something and there's like 6 signs stacked on top of each other and you're like, please just say yes or no. Can I park here while I have dinner with my friends? There are a lot of signs in the world. And sometimes it's like, when you're in an international park and you walk towards the edge of a cliff and it's like, hey, don't fall off the cliff. And you're like, oh, don't fall off the cliff. Oh. Okay.
Well, funny you say that because she's like, I'm an adult. I know the mountain well. I was walking around the paths. I've been visiting there for years. The summer boundary sign made no sense. The path on the verboten side looked very much like the approved path. It was one way. A beware of avalanches sign is a different kettle of fish. So that's a good sign. That's a good piece of regulation is putting in, hey, the rocks are going to fall here and kill you. So it's actually good that we have that sign there.
She likes that one.
I assume that that's fine. She's like, that one makes sense. I thought
she's saying beware of avalanches is stupid because it's like, I would agree that you don't, yes, I'm going to be, what is seeing the sign that says beware of avalanches going to do?
Well, I don't even know. There is a sign saying beware of avalanches. But if you're walking around cliffs near the beach and there'll be like, there's a sign saying, hey, rocks could fall down on your head. I think that's a helpful sign. I don't think it's a sign of overregulation. To beware of the
rocks falling. Sure, maybe. I think she is saying in this instance, though, that the summer boundary sign makes no sense, whereas a beware of avalanches sign does make sense.
Right.
I don't know. You're not in Janet's mind where we're on different planes here. So she was in Canada. She says, back home in Australia, when I ask a question that one of my smart-ass children assumes is rhetorical, he responds with, does she mean do bears shit in the woods?
Do bears shit in the woods,
Yeah, is the Pope a Catholic? And I can confirm from first-hand evidence that the first is true. Bears do shit. So she's saying bears do shit in the woods. Did she step in bear shit? She got lost for an hour
and I guess she saw some bear shit. She was thinking about bears. Yeah. She was worried about bears. She had bear mace spray or whatever, and she was worried about bears. That's the dumbest paragraph of all time because it's like everyone knows that bears shit in the woods. That's the whole point of the saying is that it's like an obvious thing that you don't need to clarify it. Like you also don't need from first-hand experience to tell you that the Pope is a Catholic, Janet. No. What the fuck are you talking about?
Okay, let me tell you a little something about writing and comedy. So what Janet is trying to do here is she's gone, oh, you know that old saying, does a bear shit in the woods? I'm writing about getting lost in the woods in Canada and there was bears. What if I could somehow like get that in the article? And that's what she's done. So you could learn a little something.
The rest of the article has got very strong fill the word count vibes, I got to say, across the board. And she's on a 6-figure salary to ride the ship. But the last 2 paragraphs are important. I made it back to the mountain village in British Columbia after calling the ski patrol number stored on my phone for winter emergencies. Okay, so that seems like a good, service that we have. Like
the government provides this service?
The government provided by the state.
Okay, interesting.
So it kind of seems
meddling
good.
bureaucracy again. The mountain bureaucracy. Saved her in the end.
Her calling them would, impose on the resources of that organization. And if she just read the fucking sign and thought about it and thought, I don't actually know where I'm going here, she might have avoided this whole situation. She returned to cheers from friends and locals idling in the late morning sun. In summer, there are no goggles and scarves to hide your humiliation. Getting lost was no one's fault but mine, and the warning sign was silly. Both things can be true. I was better prepared for next time. My Canadian friend Heather gave me a can of bear mace. Janet has learnt nothing, Emerald. Nothing at all.
Yeah. No, I like this though. This is like my experience has been, obviously as a child you're always just following like your parent around. And now I've had experiences where when my mum and I will go for a walk, like go for a hike, and I realize eventually that she's following me. You ever had that experience? You think that you're following someone else, but they were actually following you. And so I need to remember that I am an adult now, and I've become so accustomed in my dumb child brain to just following my mother, an allegory for, the nanny state, some might say, that I got both of us lost. So I don't know, lots to learn here, Tom, lots to learn.
Yeah, and loose seatbelts. We don't need warning labels on products or information, and asbestos is fine, and everybody needs to grow up, if you ask me. Get killed by a bear, whatevs.
I don't know, might learn a little something.
For me, the problem with the issue of housing is the Greens.
You can tell the Greens right now, they've basically dropped climate change as a political issue. You hardly ever hear them talk about it outside of Canberra.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
Speaking of learning a little something, you are about to learn so much, my dear friends, because it is, of course, Serious Danger, the podcast about green politics in Australia. Not an official Greens Party podcast, produced by Michael the Griffin. I'm Emerald Moon. I'm on Yuggera and Turrbal Country. Hello, Tom Ballard.
Hello, I'm in London. It's a bit earlier. I'm not in France. I'm not going to be told to shut up by the French. So we're in peak podcasting conditions, everyone.
Yeah, someone just be like, you're right. This week we are talking about what the heck is happening with that bloody Reserve Bank and the Greens trying to blow it all up as usual. And we're talking to Liam Flenady, the Greens candidate for Miller in the Queensland state election, and also former campaign manager for the successful 2020 campaign in South Brisbane, Amy McMahon's campaign, and Max Chandler-Mather's campaign in Griffith in 2022. Fascinating chat. Much insights.
We're less than a month away from the Queensland state election, so good to chat to Liam about his campaign and what's coming up. Thanks to our new patrons who have gone to patreon.com/SeriousToAU to support the show. Jack, David, Nate 3R. Thank you. We love you. The latest app for patrons is another installment of our Inside the Greens series where we learn about the Greens picking fights. Great app for you. And, of course, you get access to the full back catalogue. Want to give a plug? I read a piece for Crikey in their Friday Fight series about whether or not the Greens are derailing housing progress.
What were you arguing?
I decided to come down on the negative. I think they're not derailing housing progress.
Nice.
And I wrote it all by myself and didn't get any help from anyone involved. With no help at all.
Good.
You can have a read of that. And,
that means you're to blame if the readers vote that you lost the debate, hold that statement to be true. If they vote that you won, I'll revise my position.
We got to acknowledge we got this incredible story this week about Labor maybe making some changes on negative gearing. There's some modelling going
and capital
on.
gains tax.
And capital gains concessions, which is great because I thought that was impossible. That was ridiculous political suicide for Labor to change their position on those policies whatsoever. Yes. But it just sort of seems like maybe they might do it.
Maybe they might actually be listening. And yes, maybe the Greens weren't just being foolish blockers by holding out and saying, hey, you should look at these things. I mean, the fact that they were doing that, like, there's a story about that, and it was either the same day or the day after that we learned that Queensland Labor was considering rent fucking caps. It's almost as though Greens pressure works, but who am I to say? I don't host an official Greens Party podcast, so don't know.
Everything's impossible until it's not, folks. Finally, in the plug section, remember we are coming to New South Wales. We're doing 2 live shows in Newcastle and Sydney. Saturday, November 23rd at the Newcastle Comedy Club as part of the People's Blockade, the big, amazing protestival that is happening in Newcastle as Rising Tide and a bunch of other groups are coming together to block the largest coal port in the world. And Sydney, Sunday, November 24th, 1:30 p.m. at the Vanguard. All the tickets are on sale now, seriousdangerpod.com. Book. We love doing live shows, and we've neglected you, New South Wales, and we'd love to see you there.
We're sorry.
Sorry about that.
Listen, you and I ought to have an understanding. You're on my territory now, and you're going to play by my rules. Okay? 1, the bank is mine.
All right, let's chat all things Reserve Bank. Let's talk about banking and monetary policy because I know it doesn't sound like it. But there's a lot of drama going on in regards to the bank, and the Greens are getting fully involved, and neoliberal brainworms are under attack. So
that's right, sis. We're about to spill the piping hot tea on the banking system and the independence of the Reserve Bank and how it relates to the cash rate, baby. Okay, Tom, take it away.
All right. To the people still listening, first of all, we had a decision on rates from the RBA this week. Every month, the RBA comes out and says, you guys need to pay more or the same or less on your mortgage because we're the banks and we know everything. The bank has hiked interest rates 13 times since May of 2022. The cash rate is currently sitting at 4.35%. Of course, we know it's brutal. It's smashing people. If you have a mortgage, you are aware of this. Or if, generally you know about the cost of living crisis, which is inflation. In order to tackle inflation, the RBA has this very blunt instrument of either raising or lowering interest rates. And people were
which doesn't hoping, work, by the way, that's not.
No, it doesn't work. It is a terrible system, which we'll get to. People were hoping for a cut in interest rate because the central banks in the US and England, Canada, New Zealand, China, Sweden, and the EU across the world cutting rates because the world is kind of finally experiencing some deflation. Yeah. Not in Australia, though.
No, we do things a little differently down here.
Yes, the RBA decided to keep the rate exactly where it is. Emerald, you're a homeowner now. You're part of the landed gentry. You're mortgaged up to your eyeballs. Were you pissed off by this decision of the RBA? Now you have to care about interest rates. What did you think of this decision?
Yeah. To be honest, not really, because I got my mortgage when interest rates were already sky high. And so it's not as though I bought into, budgeted for a situation and then got absolutely fucked over by interest rates skyrocketing. This is pretty much, things have just been the same for me. So I'm not all that upset by it. I mean, I am, it does piss me off that the government, as I'm sure we're about to get to, refuses to use the powers that they have to cut interest rates to provide relief to homeowners who are struggling because, as we have seen, there's data coming out that, yes, mortgage stress is rising and experts are predicting more people will default on their mortgages and lose their homes because of sky-high interest rates.
Brilliant, which is to tackle inflation, which was caused by those mortgage holders, right? Ordinary people just living their lives, trying to live a decent life. They're responsible for pushing up prices across the board. So they should be punished.
Unfortunately, no, not the case. This is the other issue is that the economic reasoning that we have to, keep the interest rate really high to dampen, to basically discourage people getting loans and spending money. And that's how we bring inflation down. Bullshit, because the evidence is that discretionary spending by low and middle income households is actually down. And most of the drivers of inflation at the moment are corporate price gouging and spending by the, top percentage super wealthy households. So that's really good stuff.
And we want to dampen spending. We also want to push people into the unemployment queues if possible. See, a big part of why the RBA didn't cut interest rates this time around is because the job figures were a lot stronger than expected. Now, that's bad news. I know you wouldn't think that. But it's actually bad that people are getting jobs, even though the RBA's other goal is to try and reach full employment. There's actually bad people getting into jobs. That tightens the labour market. That gives workers more power, which puts upward pressure on wages, which is just terrible news for all involved. It's a
Need
wonderful.
that reserve army of labour. Yeah.
We're going to get the next interest rate decision on Melbourne Cup Day on November the 5th. All the market predictions, I think, at this point are saying that they're probably either going to keep it the same then. There are predictions of a cut in December at this stage.
Or even next year.
Or early next year, sorry, yes. This is taking place in a larger debate about how the RBA works. Everyone hates the RBA, by the way. It's like everyone just hates them.
But we're not allowed to say that. That's really bad and nasty if you say that.
Well, no, you are allowed to say that. It's just you can't do anything about it, even if you have that power.
Oh, my bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I get so confused.
So people might have heard about these RBA reforms that are trying to get through Parliament. Last year, Labor held an independent review into the RBA to try and make it less shit because everyone agrees that it is shit. One of the big recommendations was you should split the RBA board into two committees, one to manage the governance of the bank and the other one to focus just on monetary policy and setting interest rates. So Labor's like, cool, we accept all these recommendations. Over the past year, they've been trying to get that done. They've said, oh, of course, we want the reforms of the RBA to be bipartisan. We want to work with the coalition to make sure this happens because we think it's a long-term reform and we want to bring everyone together. And we want to work with our political enemies who, in theory, have a completely different economic worldview to us to try and make it bipartisan and nice and joyful. What do we think of this little approach, Emerald?
This is just how politics works now, isn't it? I mean, can you explain to me, though, these reforms, the only thing that I had heard about them initially was that Labor was planning to take away the powers that the Treasurer currently has to lower interest rates, like to override the RBA decision effectively in special circumstances. But they've now taken that out of their bill. Is that right? Like the Greens were like, don't do that. That sounds really bad.
Yes, that was an initial reform that Labor was going to do, give up their own power to overrule the interest rate decisions of the board. The Greens said that's ridiculous. They didn't get much support on that fact. And I think Labor is kind of like, okay, we're happy to not remove that particular power. We're never going to use that power, but we're happy to leave that in the legislation if that will help get support to get this through.
Do you know though, like in the legislation, what the powers are meant to be for? Like, what is the wording? What kind of circumstances necessitate the government exercising that power or being able to exercise it?
I couldn't tell you the exact conditions. It does seem to be there may be wording that legislation about it being extraordinary circumstances, in special circumstances. Okay. If the Treasurer wants to overrule the RBA, both the bank and the Treasurer need to make a statement to Parliament explaining their reasoning as to why they disagree when it comes to interest rates. Heaven forbid that the Australian people would get an insight and people would have to justify their decisions. And we might expose the fact that making decisions about interest rates is a political move and a decision that is informed by people's ideological precepts. Like that would be the end of the world.
Yes, I love all of the hand-wringing from political journalists and political editors about how decisions by the RBA are not political.
Not political, no.
As they're writing their article on the political events of that week and the political decisions that have happened in politics. And they are writing an article about the RBA and they're like, but it's not. None of this is political, guys. You need to stop politicizing this.
This is just economics. That has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, nothing
politics
to do with
is just
politics.
Whatever politicians say. Very strange. So Labor's like, okay, let's make these reforms bipartisan. It seemed like the coalition were on board. They had months and months of negotiating. They said, yep, we agree. We'll do this in a bipartisan way. And it seems like they reached a deal. Particularly the coalition said they were concerned that Labor was going to sack and stack the RBA board, basically with union mates or people who are aligned with Labor.
Just ridiculous. Anyway, whatever.
Jim Chalmers said, well, I mean, there was talk about getting a workers' representative on the RBA board. I think Bob Hawke was on the RBA board when he was there to the ACTU. I think that would be a good thing for them to do, but that got all abandoned very quickly.
Just the rhetoric around union mates and that is inherently unreasonable, I guess, is what I mean, you know.
Yes. When will the business community get a voice in banking decisions?
Yeah.
That's what we're all wondering.
Yeah.
But anyway, Jim Chalmers said, well, to address that concern, we will say that all the existing RBA board members will be shifted onto the new interest setting board in this new version of the RBA.
Right.
And they'll be given 5-year terms. So we, Labor, couldn't possibly stack this new RBA board. Which also means, don't worry, everyone, the board that everyone is making the terrible decisions right now, all those people are going to stay employed.
We're going to keep them. You're welcome.
So that's good. So it seemed like they had bipartisan support. It was all good. Then a couple of weeks ago, it all fell apart. Angus Taylor came out and said, recent public comments from not only the Treasurer but other senior Labor figures in an attempt to blame the RBA for their own economic failures are deeply unsettling. Considering recent events, the Coalition has serious questions about the government's commitment to the continued independence of the RBA, and therefore we will not be complicit in Labor's sack and stack strategy, and we will be opposing the bill.
Okay.
So they got triggered by some free speech here, Emerald.
Triggered. Yeah. Wow. Very anti-free speech of them.
Indeed. What kind of comments Angus Taylor was talking about? What made them so scared?
Must have been pretty extreme. Slurs. I don't know. Can we say it on the podcast?
Anti-banking slurs.
Anti-banking slurs.
you fucking checking
you
pen
hedge
pusher
fund
cunts.
manager.
Here are the comments that Angus Taylor was referring to. Jim Chalmers saying that the RBA's interest rate rises are smashing the economy. Absolutely true. The ALP president, Wayne Swan, saying that the rate rises were hammering households, hammering mums and dads, and accused the RBA of punching itself in the face and putting economic dogma over rational economic decision-making. That's great. One ABC article by Jacob Grieber quoted a senior Labor figure describing Michelle Bullock, that's the RBA governor, as a nutter, and the RBA board as barbarians and weirdos in the thrall of a bizarre groupthink.
That's pretty funny.
It's pretty great. This is all getting 5 stars from me. I think it's all great, accurate, and funny.
Yeah, get him on the podcast.
And also we've got this general backgrounding that lots of Labor figures who are furious at what the bank has been doing in terms of constantly raising interest rates, and also how shit they've been at economic forecasting, like all the problems with the RBA that everyone has. Labor's been voicing these concerns.
Yes.
So apparently, because of those kind of comments, the Coalition is saying, we're not supporting this bill anymore. We think you don't believe in the independence of the RBA, and so you're on your own here. Now, I think it's almost fair to say that it's like a very cynical political move. How sincere was their initial support for the bill, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, it's just basically them saying, fuck you all, we're off.
Yeah.
And I guess it just sort of goes to show that conservative political enemies can't be trusted. Do you think Labor's ever going to learn that lesson and might ever possibly consider coming to the Greens and negotiating with us first so that you could actually get support of this stuff through?
We will have to wait and be pleasantly surprised.
Jesus. So they don't have coalition support to get the RBA reforms through Parliament, so they need to get the support from the crossbench and your old mates
the Greens.
in the Greens. And we'll support the reforms, but we have some conditions.
Yeah.
The federal government's reforms of the Reserve Bank appear to be dead in the water after the Greens flagged they would withhold support until interest rates are cut. The Greens have now said that their support is contingent on an interest rate cut either by the RBA or through the intervention of Treasurer Jim Chalmers using a controversial power that has never been used before. That's the power that we were talking about before. This is Section 11 of the Reserve Bank Act, in which the Treasurer can overrule RBA decisions.
Yeah.
Greens economic justice spokesman Nick McKim said a 0.25 percentage point cut in interest rates would save a person with the average mortgage of $641,000 around $100 a month in reduced repayments, just to put a dollar figure on what we're talking about here. And he said, now both the Treasurer and Governor know what's needed. If they want these reforms passed, they have to bring interest rates down. We're agnostic about whether it's Jim Chalmers using the powers he's got or Michelle Bullock and the board using their powers. We just want it done, and we want it done soon. A 25 basis point cut in interest rates would meet that demand. The current interest rate settings are smashing the economy, and that's one thing we agree with Dr. Chalmers on. Everyone shat their pants. This is the worst thing that anyone's ever said in Australian politics and lost their minds.
Yep.
We'll get to that in a moment. But first of all, what do you think of this particular demand from Nick McKim, this spicy move from the Greens?
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, to be clear, certainly not the first time that the Greens have made this demand that A, the RBA cut interest rates, or B, the Treasurer exercise his powers to cut them.
Yes.
Like they've been saying this for a long time, at least the last year or more even. Using it in the context of, we're going to withhold support for this bill. At first, it's interesting because I was like, well, the bills, we don't really have problems with the bill, right? But I think it was a helpful opportunity for the Greens to platform our policies for mortgage holders. Obviously, we've got a lot out there for renters, and talking about mortgages is helpful. I did not expect it to go to I probably didn't expect Nick McKim to go this hard and for the response to be as outraged and insane as it was.
Yes, well, Mike Seckham did the recent 7am podcast, and he called around the Greens party room. The general impression he got is that he thinks that there's discontent amongst the party room, and some people didn't think that Nick McKim was going to go as hard as he did, and it was really about securing the power in the legislation, the Section 11, make sure we save that, as opposed to actually demanding that they use it.
That was my impression. I was surprised. Right. I think this was a little bit of a surprise. I think, like, my inside, like, and this isn't based on, anything. I haven't spoken to federal Greens people about this, but I think he sort of, like, went for it, and the media were like, whoa, and they were like, well, we either double down or back away and let's fucking double down and just go hard. And I kind of respect that.
Well, sure. Nick McKim is going off, King, and I'm here for it, y'all. But but people sort of saying, someone's saying, oh, this is an extraordinary circumstance in which you would expect the Treasurer to use those powers. And I'm like, well, 13 interest rate rises, people getting smashed across the board.
Holders. Like, say that to people who are going to lose their homes, that this isn't extraordinary circumstances. That's what, I think you're right. I think that's why I was curious to know what the wording is in the legislation, because it's like, if this isn't a time when the government should step in and help people, what the fuck is it there for? What is this section there for? What is the government there for?
Yeah. Well, the response was bananas. We had Finance Minister Katie Gallagher saying, I just think the Greens are out of control at the moment, full of self-importance and out-seeking populist approach to everything. Do you mean a popular approach to everything, Katie, and something that might actually address people's problems?
It's a fine line, isn't it?
Well, again, as we've discussed at length, I'm sure if you asked her to define what she means by populist, she means just something that goes against popular. The neoliberal consensus, probably.
Yeah.
It's crazy what they're saying to us. So if that's their ultimatum, and it's a bit unseemly, Nick McKim going around issuing ultimatums, we won't work with that. That's crazy. It's economically irresponsible, and we won't do it. There are good reasons why the bank is independent and the interest rate setting is independent of the political process. It has served our country well. Now, just a reminder, we're talking about an institution and a system that we are desperately trying to reform. Like, this is the whole point of the bill. It's like, this is working, served us really well, but we need to change everything about it, by the way.
I'm sure it served you well. It served you and your friends well.
What about everyone else, mate? She also didn't lay out the good reasons why the bank is independent. This just sort of assumed that, like, yes, that the not getting involved is because it's never happened before, therefore it must be good, because we can't possibly do things differently to address the terrible status quo that people are suffering through, for fuck's sake.
No, this is the way things have been and they must remain so.
We got a lovely impartial ABC headline from Jacob Grieber. Greens demand hostile takeover of RBA in exchange for passing board reforms in likely death knell for Treasurer's bill. Calm the fuck down, mate.
Insane. I saw this headline and I was like, wait, what are the Greens doing? I was like, are they talking about the thing where we just want them to exercise the legislative power that they already have? Oh, yeah, okay. That's what they mean by this absolutely insane headline.
Right. Demand, I mean, I guess they are our demands when you're going in negotiation, but it's also like, this is laying out the Greens' terms as part of their negotiation, which the government needs in order to pass the legislation. Okay, so Greens will have needs. Greens have needs, guys.
Yeah, Greens have needs, guys.
In The Guardian, we had columnist Peter Hannum comparing us to Trump, of course, saying the Greens may bristle at the comparison, but this is Trumpist. Now, Trump has talked about, setting interest rates in the US context, of course. Of course, yes. Anyone would want the power that, like, you're talking about, because they know interest rates are very important to the economy. I'm not saying that Trump believes in, exerting more democratic control over the economy, but a leader would be saying, well, yes, the people's representatives maybe could have a say on setting this very important economic measure, perhaps. It was kind of funny because the Fed Reserve cut interest rates, I think, last week or the week before, and Trump called it a political move, of course, because it's during the election campaign. And he's like, well, you're being an asshole, of course, Donald Trump, but interesting kind of insight into, like, yes, it is it's a political move with political ramifications.
Yeah, let's get Trump on the show.
Yeah, he's an ally. He's a comrade. So lots of this kind of stuff. UNSW Business School Professor of Economics Richard Holden said that government intervention in interest rate decisions would completely destroy the credibility and independence of the Reserve Bank. so much credibility at the
so
moment.
Much credibility there.
Just incredible credibility. Independence is a lie, so it's stupid. And Crikey said they spoke to 2 economists who said overriding the Reserve Bank would be something that typically happens in authoritarian countries. Jesus.
Oh my God.
So people losing their minds. Now, just quickly, I think we can sort of run through the main arguments that we're talking about here, the main objections people have.
Yeah.
The sweet independence of the RBA. This must be preserved at all costs, apparently.
Very real.
Now, people have said, well, yeah, it's not real because the government has this power. The government appoints members to the RBA.
Yeah.
So its independence is non-existent. That's an illusion. It doesn't really mean anything. It is a political institution. It's an economic institution. The people that work there have a political ideology. They like to think they don't. They like to present the science of economics as something that's like can just be followed, and you can work out the great formula to produce the great society, and that's what guides them. But that's bullshit. And Nick McKim was saying that explicitly. We are deliberately bringing the RBA into the centre of the political debate where it belongs. The RBA board are unelected technocrats, not high priests who are beyond criticism. Every decision they make is political. And that was just interesting to me because it's like, so we've got all these Labor figures, including Wayne Swan, publicly criticising the decisions of the RBA. So presumably you do that to try and influence the RBA, to put pressure on the RBA to reconsider what they're doing. So to critique the RBA's decisions and to say that this is having a terrible effect and they should change course is to try and have some kind of influence or political sway over the RBA.
Independence.
But if anyone, how
dare they?
Yes, but if the Greens come along and say, well, you actually have the power to override their decisions if we think that they're making the wrong decisions, no, that's the worst thing you could possibly do.
Yeah. One thing I do want to say that's interesting about this strategy of, as Nick McKim is saying, putting the RBA front and center. Like, I think that, yes, it's worthwhile deliberately trying to undermine this illusion of independence and like economic rationalism and the idea that this is an infallible institution, whatever he called it, the high priest of the economy at the RBA. But at the same time, you risk obscuring the fact that the cash rate that's set by the RBA isn't just flow through directly to what the banks are charging people on their mortgages. The big banks are all charging well above that on their interest rates and pocketing the excess, like pocketing the profits. I think the stat is about $400 from the average monthly mortgage repayment going into direct profit for the big banks who are making something like, $30 billion a year. And so if those rates were actually tied to the cash rate, tied to the rate that the RBA is setting, that would also mean cheaper mortgages for people. And so I think it's important to keep the big banks in our sights as well, and push for, like we are in Queensland, for example, a publicly owned bank, again, a state bank that would have mortgages at a lower rate. But I do also, I think there is merit in going after the RBA.
Yes, well, before the RBA was established, the Commonwealth Bank was our central bank, which was a publicly owned bank before privatised and sold off by Labor. Thanks very much.
Yes,
and lots of people have said it is insane that the RBA, which is technically a publicly owned bank or should be a bank for the Australian people, but of course you're not allowed to have an account with the RBA or anything like that. That's against the law.
Yeah.
There's this other argument that, of course, politicians shouldn't be in charge of monetary policy because politicians, you can't trust politicians, and they'll just think in short-term time frames, and they'll just react to the will of the people because they're accountable to the will.
You can trust economists.
Well, first of all, you can't trust economists. Secondly, I'm sorry, but politicians decide our defence policy, decide whether or not we go to war. They decide our fiscal policy and health education policy. So why not?
They decide the laws. They decide who gets locked up. They decide, what happens to the planet. Like that's very true. They decide where the money flows in every other respect.
But apparently not on this particular one. And I'm sorry, the Treasury doesn't have economists. They don't have technocrats there. You could have a system in which, experts provide advice to the Treasurer or to the politicians on making this decision, because clearly there is no, all-knowing science, or there is not some citadel like the RBA that has all answers to all questions, that know exactly what to do when it comes to interest rates to make society better and to make people's lives better, because they're failing really badly at that, both in terms of their interest rate decisions and their forecasting about what's happening in the future. They don't know what the fuck's going on. So,
and at the same time, like, it's predicated on this artificial distinction between quote unquote experts and like other people, whether it's politicians or anyone else. And it's like, well, yes, there are people who can make the right decisions, and they're the economists and the experts, and they know exactly what's right, and it's a science, and that's going to work. And then there's the other people. And they don't know. And it's like, actually, they're all, hey, we're all just people at the end of the day. You know what I mean? We all feel, we all bleed. We all need
people
air, water,
just people.
love.
One objection that I think, we're getting towards the edges of my economic knowledge here on this point, but people say that if the government were to do this, were to override the RBA, then there would be repercussions in currency markets and bond markets, and the cost to Australia would be investors at home and abroad would demand a higher price in interest rates to lend money to Australian governments and businesses. That is, international markets would freak out the idea of a democratically elected government intervening over the decisions of its central bank, and that may, have effects on bond rates and that kind of stuff, which does, which cause you a few problems. I don't know enough about this to sort of fully weigh in. I guess the only thing I'd say is, if that is true, that system should appall everyone in the entire fucking world. And we should all be working hard to defeat that system and find something else, because that's a ridiculous way. And if we believe in sovereignty and Australia being able to make decisions about how we run our society and economy, we shouldn't just be held hostage to the forces of global capitalism. That's what I think.
And I would imagine, or at least hope, that the people who are making these global investment decisions are somewhat aware of, the international financial situation, and the fact that, as you listed earlier, many nations around the country are actually lowering interest rates, and might look at the fact that Australia hasn't lowered interest rates and go, oh, maybe given the rising levels of mortgage stress and the global context, it makes a lot of sense that the government would have intervened there to introduce it, which the Greens are calling for a fairly modest 25 basis point cut. So I think if that spooked them and scared them off, then they're very easily spooked.
It's sort of just so bizarre, because all the people who are hating what the RBA is doing at the moment, they clearly want the RBA to bring down interest rates, right? Yeah. So apparently that's fine if the RBA comes to that decision itself, either next month or in December. That's good. That's fine. But if we do it now, if they have the powers that we have available to us to lower those interest rates now, the world's going to shit its pants.
Got to wait and just wait and see a little bit longer, even though, we can't wait and see. It's like, well, we kept interest rates on hold and then inflation was slightly down. So maybe it's working, but you have to consider the fact that inflation rates, CPI, are also kind of fake, because they're just based on things like energy costs. Like, they're based on specific measures in the economy, which can be artificially, manipulated by governments, for example, by administering energy rebates, which we've done in Queensland, which have lowered, technically, inflation rates, even though if I go to the fucking grocery store and I try to buy cheese, it's still more expensive.
Another point that came up was that people would argue that the Greens' position here is a little bit contradictory. That is, predicating our support for the RBA reforms on the idea of the Treasurer intervening on interest rates is a bit weird, because the reforms that we're passing include setting up a more expert panel within the RBA to set interest rates. So sort of furthering the independence of that sort of interest rate decision is part of the reforms that we're passing. I guess Nick McKim would probably say to that, well, who cares if we get to cut the interest rates? If that the RBA's would basically be, the status quo would be preserved as long as the Treasurer still enacts the power to bring down the interest rates. That would be the main political victory that we'd be fighting for, which I think is probably fair enough.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was going pretty hard on Crikey. He did an interview, and they were sort of, saying, man, Nick McKim, you seem quite alone on this position. Lots of people are talking about how crazy the idea is here, but you seem pretty alone. And Nick McKim said he wasn't surprised that neoliberal economists aren't on board. The classical neoliberal economists who don't like what we're proposing in terms of the government of the day overriding the RBA are the same people who are supporting an economic framework that is literally rendering the planet incapable of sustaining human life. So I don't care what they think. I couldn't care less what they think. They have no credibility at all on economics, because they're literally supporting an economic framework that is cooking the planet and resulting in ecosystem collapse. Why would I listen to them?
I mean, this guy's got a point. This guy's kind of got a point.
Have you triggered a few people? Crikey asks him. I can't help it if the neoliberal brainworms have consumed the minds of other people. That's their problem, not mine. Again, maybe a little bit too online to use that kind of phrase.
Well, I'm like, is this a calculated decision where they're like, well, who's reading Crikey? It's us. Like, it's you and me, and we'll appreciate the phrase.
I'm just trying to find the article that I wrote, so that's why I'm on there.
That's right.
I must say, I'm not sure about this response. Crikey asked, do you have any examples of people who aren't neoliberal economists who do support what you're doing? Nick Beckham says, it's not my job to ring every economist in the country and ask whether they support it or not. It's your job. Now,
I don't know if that's what the interviewer was asking, but yeah.
I mean, I guess I'd just be interested in what does the Australia Institute think about this, or historians, or John Quiggin. I mean, surely there are more progressively minded economists who aren't in the tank for Labor on every decision they do, who might be able to just at least bring some reasonable level of debate to this. Say, this is a power enshrined in the RBA Act. Let's look at what the RBA is actually doing at the moment, and more broadly, on a more fundamental question. I know we've talked about this before on this particular topic, but it's like, do you believe in democratic control over the economy? Or do you think that economic power is the reserve of, yes, a technocratic political class or a knowledge class that shouldn't be held accountable at all to the people? If you don't think that, and you think that people should be able to vote for people who then make big decisions about how the economy is run and how people's lives look, you probably support the government actually making these kind of interventions.
No, that's authoritarianism, Tom. It's practically Stalinism.
Sorry, I was Trump again, lol.
Oops.
So, look, I mean, everyone's saying that there's no way Labor's possibly going to do this. Labor certainly thinks that it's crazy, of course, and they're not going to listen to it. If the RBA reforms dies, does anyone care? Is it going to have any impact on anything, anywhere politically?
I don't. I mean, if the reforms, no, I don't. That's what I mean. That I'm like, I don't think that these reforms really. I don't think we care about them that much. I guess I haven't read the legislation. Maybe it'll fix everything, but I doubt it.
I'll tell you what is a win here. It's like there's no way that people would know that the government has this power if it weren't for the Greens, right? Like everyone would like to pretend
that's the intention. That's right. Like that's got to be part of the strategy here, and I think that is a target, an objective achieved, or at least in some small measure. Yeah.
But, again, full credit for Nick Beckham for fighting this fight and making the point. He was like, Labor, this is before the RBA announced that they were keeping interest rates where they are. He said, I guarantee you the RBA is going to keep rates where they are. Labor's going to come out and say, this is terrible. Oh, my God. And they're going to pretend like they don't have the power to do anything about it. That's bullshit. Do that. That's a lie.
Yes, holding them to account for that is very worthwhile. Thanks, Nick McKing.
We are the pride of Brisbane town. We wear maroon, blue and gold. We will always fight for victory, like Fitzroy and Bears of old.
So our guest today, Liam Flenady, he's a musician, a long-time Queensland Greens campaigner and strategist, and now the Greens candidate for Miller in the upcoming Queensland state election. Thanks for joining us, Liam.
Very happy to be here. Thanks.
Round of applause.
Oh, Jesus.
For the Blenmeister.
You're ambushing me at the very start.
You may currently be suffering from campaign fever. You are like, we're going to win everything. Is that your state of mind at the moment?
No, I'm very measured, Emerald. You know that about me. I think we are very, very, very close to winning all of our target seats in Queensland this election. I feel we're very, very close, but it's definitely not a sure bet. I think we have a very good shot of going from 2 seats in Queensland State Parliament to 6, but it's not a sure bet. So no candidate fever here, just pure
a sixer
clinical, political analysis from me.
Precise,
today.
Reasoned. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Flourishing in my lane.
I mean, I say this because as we speak, you have like effectively left your job to just like door knock full time, which you weren't initially planning to do because you think that maybe we could actually win Miller, which we will get to. But I wanted to do a little quick introduction to you first. So not to expose you, just putting on the table up front that you initially came to the Greens after being involved in everyone's favourite newspaper sellers, the Socialist Alternative, right? You were a salty. You were organising Marx conferences.
You're getting your trot groups mixed up. You're getting your trot groups mixed up. I was a member of the Socialist
really? I thought
Alliance.
You were a salty.
I was a member of the Socialist Alliance for several years.
Bad.
After I got politicised in about 2010, when we had Gillard in federal government and they were rehashing the, reopening Manus and Nauru. And I went to a bunch of rallies, and at the same time, the coal seam gas, rollout was happening across Queensland. And I was like, this seems like bad news. And then it was the Socialist Alliance that seemed to have the most coherent sort of political analysis of what the hell was going on at the time. So I joined them and learned a lot. I think it's a good thing. But I learned at a certain point that I wanted to win stuff for the future for progressive politics in this country. And it was which is no shade on our friends to the left. But like winning's quite important. And so if you want to change the world, you have to sort of work out how to win stuff. And when I saw in 2016 Jono, I wasn't involved in Jono's first campaign for the Gabba ward up here in Brisbane, but I watched it because I was overseas at the time. And I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And then they won. And I was like, oh, well, hell yeah, this looks good. Radical politics that can win. Sign me up. And then I just went deep down the Greens rabbit hole since then. So, and here I am running for a damn seat. I did run for seats back at the Socialist Alliance. I got about 200 votes.
Oh, congratulations.
I was involved, actually. I ran in 2012 for the seat of South Brisbane. And that was when the Premier, Anna Bligh, was the member, and she stepped down straight after, so I feel I had a role in her downfall. And I also ran for Griffith in 2013 when Rudd was the member of Griffith, and he lost and stepped down afterwards. And I feel like maybe, there's a pattern here.
Well, maybe it was those things, or maybe it was the fact that you later went on to manage the campaigns that actually successfully unseated Labor MPs in those electorates.
Excellent segue.
Which is kind of like skipping ahead a little bit. But
slight redemption for me too, to go from the 200 votes that I won then, and then managed Amy's campaign for South Brisbane that we won, and then Max's for 2022 that we actually won and got tens of thousands more votes. So yes,
it could have been that. It could have been that. I don't know. Who's to say?
Yeah.
So what do you? I mean, this is the big question. 50 words or less. What do you think, in your expert opinion, as someone who has been deep in Queensland Green stuff for the last, since the 2016 breakthrough in Jono's seat? What is the reason for that exponential growth up here in Queensland over the last few years?
50 words. I think there's a number of different conditions.
Have to be 50 words.
I think the Queensland Greens made a realisation in around 2016, 2017 around this sort of, there's a couple of realizations at the same time. So one was that people are really, 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 really disconnected from politics, which is actually more a reflection of politics being disconnected from them than anything else. And that's sort of an orientation that you have to take very seriously. You have to kind of go, well, if people are feeling like politics is completely this alien thing out over there, you can't come in as just like, oh, I'm just like a slightly better representative of the political class and expect that that's going to be convincing. And you have to adopt your tactics and your sort of strategies to understand that that's where people are at. People either shift between rage and disillusionment and despair, but within that spectrum, all of the majority of people feel very detached from politics. And that was one realization that we made. And that was why door knocking became really central, because it's like, well, how else are you going to reach people? And the other realization I think we made was that as Labor over the last 30, 40, however many years has abandoned any sense of being a social democratic party, in Queensland and across the country, basically there was this huge space that was more or less the common sense of most people in the country, which is that, more public ownership of essential services and infrastructure is good, higher taxes on big corporations is good, funding our essential services is good, like those sorts of really basic things are a broad common sense in this country.
Radical, obstructive, crazy policies.
Yeah, exactly. And when we decided that what we wanted to do was destroy everything and obstruct all progress in this country, then we started winning. So it was. I think it was those two things. It was that shift. That it was a kind of like, let's occupy this space of like a kind of a progressive left social democratic project that Labor's abandoned, that is actually accords broadly with the common sense of most people in the country, and let's find a way of articulating it and reaching people with it that actually relates to their experience of politics being this kind of like, detached and slightly alien and slightly hostile thing. And so that's, it means obviously you go out and knock on doors, but the way that you go out and knock on doors is a little different than just like going there and proselytizing about how good you are. It's a much more of a dialogical thing and all of that. So I think that's a big part. Like I would say those two things combined, and we had some fabulous candidates too, which helped, and some fabulous campaigners, and there was a sense of it's time sort of moment. So all those things combined, I think, kind of got us to where we are now. 50 words.
I have a different take, Liam. I think it's because there were no teal candidates in Queensland.
There
are no teals, and that's the only reason you guys have done well.
Younger demographics.
Yes,
and everyone moving from Melbourne to Brisbane is the reason. And also, door knocking doesn't work because whenever anyone knocks on my door, I think, who the hell is this? And do I need to put pants on?
Do I need to put pants on for this?
Yeah, so these are my two major.
I don't know if you saw that article.
Or do I need to take pants off?
Hey, that's right. That's what I always think. No, I think it's like, and your point as well about it's the way that we door knock, because I think a lot of the time, the Greens talk a lot about door knocking, and there's a little bit of this consciousness of the Greens have won these seats through door knocking, and then the Labor Party will be like, well, we door knock too, and some of their campaigns they are knocking on a lot of doors as well. But I think a lot of that is still, as I understand it, just like voter ID, being like trying to figure out how this person's going to vote, or sometimes they might do like surveys and things like that. They're not necessarily having persuasive conversations and conversations that meet someone where they are, and they don't really have the policies to present when someone says this is the problem in my life. What can they say? Oh, well, that's yes, we'll investigate an inquiry into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think probably exactly. Yeah. They have to equivocate, prevaricate, and they have to because what the Greens' approach to door knocking, at least in Queensland, is about raising people's expectations and raising people and trying to mobilise people. Like not necessarily in the sense of getting people to like sign up. I mean, obviously you try, if they're a supporter, you try to get them activated when you talk to them, but to get people to want more. Right? And to get people to think, you know what, fuck it, we do deserve a public bank. You know what, we do deserve this. Whereas if you're a Labor door knocker or an LNP door knocker, I mean, I don't know if I think they do sometimes, but if you're a Labor door knocker, your main job is to try to defend your government and say that any demands that go beyond what you're currently doing are kind of unreasonable and sort of like,
it's to lower expectations.
We'd love to be able to, but we can't. Is to lower expectations. So it's a very, very different style, which I feel as if you're the person on the receiving end, what you're getting is this kind of pushback against your kind of organic interests and demands. Whereas with the Greens, we're like, no, absolutely, you do deserve that park. You do deserve, a better public transport route. You do deserve, a public bank or, higher taxes on the gas corporations or whatever. So it's a very, very different dynamic. And I think that's our project, right? Is to increasingly mobilise and raise people's expectations until the point where we win government and we have a mobilised people to back us up to actually drive that reform agenda, which is the opposite of what Labor's doing. Yeah,
people
and it's
might
fun
remember.
Too. It's much more fun for everybody involved.
So I think so too. I mean, I haven't door knocked for it, I can imagine. And people might remember, we can put the links in the show notes as well. We probably referred to the articles that have been published in Jacobin over the last few years. In 2020, for example, you did a piece with Max Chandler-Mather reflecting on the successes in the 2020 state election, where you managed Amy McMahon's campaign in South Brisbane. And then also that interview that you did after the 2022 federal election, where you'd managed Max's campaign and seemed to hit similar themes around anti-political sentiment, how you organise on the ground, field campaigns, and also the growth of like identifying renters as kind of emblematic of a political, like of a class of people to be mobilized. I might also, while we're talking about things that you've done in the past, put the link in the show notes to Floodcast. I don't know how many of our listeners listen to Floodcast, which is obviously not as active anymore, but that was one of the first like podcasts that I remember listening to. And feeling, you were kind of a regular guest, but I remember listening to it and feeling a little bit stupid, but also excited about politics and being like, I want to be smart and involved like these guys.
Stupid and excited. I want to be smart and bored.
Smart and bored, exactly. Yeah, I need a change. So then 2022, we win a bunch of seats. You went and worked in Elizabeth Watson Brown's office, set up her office, was managing that. But then at some point, obviously decided, no, I'm going to step out from backstage and go back to my roots as a candidate where I previously won 200 votes and maybe do a little bit better than that. How did that happen? Why were you like, okay, now I'm going to do it. I'm going to run in Miller?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Firstly, I moved to the area after being priced out of the inner south. So I was living, Nicole, my partner, and I were living in sort of West End, Wollongabba, and there was just like literally no affordable rentals available. And so we moved to Moorooka. And then we had a kid and we were, trying to find a place where we could just buy a little townhouse, and we found a decent place in Moorooka and fell in love with the area. It's bloody incredible. The best suburb in the best city, in the best state, in the best country. Anyway, so we sort of just like realized that this is where we were based. And then I started to think about, it's been a long-term thought of mine that the Greens need to expand into the sort of more outer suburban, multicultural working class areas of all the big capital cities if we're going to be a project that can wield genuine social and political power. And in Brisbane, that means moving towards areas like Logan and Ipswich, where there's a whole constituency there who frankly would benefit much more than a lot of the inner city middle-class progressives that used to be, sort of are part of our original base, would benefit a lot more from that platform that we have, that social democratic platform, than they would. And if we could unite these constituencies of radicalising young renters, a kind of multicultural working class in the outer suburbs and the sort of inner city uni-educated sort of progressive homeowners, you're starting to build quite a coalition, quite a bloc. And so the seat of Miller is, to my mind, the kind of the last seat of that kind of inner city area before you move out towards a much more mixed and far more working class demographic. And basically from a party expansion point of view and from our political project, like if we don't win a seat, like until we win Miller, we're not going to have the resources and the capacity to go out and win seats further out. And so it's, for me, it was kind of like, all right, right place, right time. I'm here. I know how to run a campaign, and this is a good opportunity to try to win this seat in one fell swoop. And then next state election, be able to go after seats like Toohey, Mount Ommaney, and all the way out to like Inala and stuff, which I think would really start to change the dynamics of Queensland politics quite drastically, frankly. It also would unlock the seat of Moreton, which at the federal level, which I'm really, really keen for us to try to pick up in 2025. And now that we have an amazing candidate, Rima Naji, running, I'm all the more excited about that. So for me, it was kind of like, we need to expand our project. We can't get hemmed in the inner city. Winning a seat like Miller unlocks a whole new path for the Greens, which I think is quite exciting.
Almost like a bridge, yes, to that next stage.
Yeah, exactly. I put my hand up because I thought maybe I have a chance to do that.
Yeah. And of course, so Miller is held at the moment
being an MP sounds awful, but whatever.
So Miller at the moment is held by Mark Bailey. So Labor, former Transport Minister, who in a sort of reshuffle when Stephen Miles became Premier, no longer has a ministry, but has a pretty strong margin, as I understand it. But we're figuring that, because of the growth of the Greens in Brisbane and the structural swing against Labor, there is a shot at winning it. But I guess from my perspective, watching how Miller has grown, it looks as though it was one where the numbers were looking possible. But then once you started door knocking was when it was like, oh, this this might actually be a goer. I'm keen to hear about, what the field campaign looks like. Like, what kind of scale of door knocking are you doing, and what are the door knocks that you personally are doing feeling like?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So when I said, put my hand up to run, I was like, look, it's a long shot. You may as well throw ourselves at it and see what happens. About 2 months ago, sort of clicked for me that like, oh no, I mean, I think this is one of the ones that we can't, like, it would be a shame to not pick up this time. Like, we're in it now, it's ours to lose, sort of a thing. And I think that's because, the data, I suppose, that we're getting back from the doors is there's so much more support there than we expected. The vote is quite soft. Like, people aren't wedded to really either major party. I mean, it's not dissimilar to what you get across the city, which is really good. But our vote is sort of artificially low just because we haven't had a lot of capacity in the area in the past, despite good work from the branch in the past, and because 2020. It was the COVID election, and the Labor vote was artificially high because people wanted to reward Palaszczuk's government for keeping people safe. And so there's this artificially big gap that looks really big on paper, but in reality is now incredibly narrow because there's been an organic growth in the Greens vote in the area. That's partly just because people are pissed at the major parties, but partly also a demographic shift into the area. People like me moving out of the inner south or inner city to start a family, find an affordable place to live, and they're bringing their Green vote with them. Maybe there's some Melbourneites that moved here as well. Who knows? And so the vote is just organically growing while the Labor vote is organically declining at the same time. And then the field campaign's really picked up. So we've had. It's not the biggest campaign the Greens are running in Queensland at the moment. That would, Cooper and Greenslopes, McConnell probably are all, there's probably slightly bigger campaigns. But we've had close to 4,500 conversations so far this campaign. We're hoping to get up to 6. That's more conversation. I mean, that's a order of magnitude larger than anything we've done in the seat before. So I think the last campaign that we ran in 2020, we probably only got about 300 or 400 conversations. So to go from 300 or 400 to 6,000, I think there's a lot of people there who just are one conversation away from voting for the Greens, whereas in seats like South Brisbane, we've just been door knocking it relentlessly every year, and people are like, oh, you're back again. Yes, I'm still voting for you. Go away. Whereas here it's like, oh, the Greens are here, first time. Wow, wow! I didn't think the Greens are here. One guy said, "Oh, I didn't think the Green curtain extended this far," and I was like, "Mate, you're in Yeronga. It's not that far out. Like, you're not in the outer. Like, you're not in the sticks."
Yeah. What are you all doing out here? That's the sort of feel. Yeah.
Well, looks like we got ourselves a Green.
I think you might be a little lost, sir.
I'm from out of town. I don't know. Anyway.
Which way to West End, sir?
The remote suburb of Yeronga,
No, I think you're right. Like, the conversion rate would be so much higher from those conversations just because it's such like ripe, fertile ground. So, I mean, that's Miller. I'm keen as well to just do a chat about the state election more broadly and your take on that. I feel like my summary for listeners, since we haven't really done a proper kind of summary into the state election, it's coming up on 26 October. So actually yesterday, well, when we're recording this, was 1 month out. Queensland, it's unicameral parliament. Labor currently has a big old majority in the single house, which, as you say, is effectively a reward because the last state election was in 2020, a reward for not, killing as many people as they possibly could have during COVID.
Queensland hospitals are for Queenslanders. Yes.
Yes. People have been there since 2015. Labor has been in power since 2015, and so people are just generally a bit sick of it. And the polling has for some time been showing huge swings away and towards the LNP. Yes. And everyone now expects the LNP will probably win government. The sad part, I think, is that Queensland Labor, realised this, but maybe didn't realise it quickly enough. And everyone was quite sick of Palaszczuk a long time ago. And it took them until December last year to replace her with Stephen Miles, who's meant to be this, I guess, left factional warrior, environmental hero, etc. And he's not that great. He's still approving new coal projects. He's no Greens premier, but he has done since becoming premier some kind of impressive things, like the $1,000 electricity rebate. He kind of spearheaded this big change to emissions reduction targets in Queensland, 95% by 2035. Not that far from what the Greens have called for. Banned fracking in the Channel Country, Lake Eyre Basin, 50-cent public transport fares. I don't know if I'm missing anything.
Yeah,
but he's kind of doing all these good things, but it's like, is it just too little, too late?
Yeah, that's definitely, I think that's a good summary. Like from out and knocking on doors, you get a sense of where people are at here. I think this is the first election that I've door knocked in that has had such a deep level of malaise about like politics. It's not even anger. It's just sort of like a shrugging of the shoulders, like, I don't know. So, I mean, I think it's very hard to turn that around in a really fast, in a really short period of time. And yeah, I mean, Labor's been in for 9 years now, and people's lives have just gotten worse over this period. And now we've got a federal Labor government as well, and people's lives have just gotten worse, right? And let's bear in mind that Labor were not necessarily hugely popular when they got back in 2015. It was just that Newman had so catastrophically destroyed stuff that like Labor managed to scrape back over the line. So the Liberal, the LNP premier at the time, just blew things up in the public service and got booted out after a single term. And then Palaszczuk managed to have this miracle victory, but it was only just they only just managed to get into government, and then their vote went backwards in 2017 by a point or two, and then COVID artificially kind of bought them some time.
Yes.
And so it's not like they were going from this hugely strong position and it's deteriorated. They were just kind of, and this is this anti-political condition that we live in. It's like not like people have this huge love of the major parties. And I would say in Queensland, as for the rest of Australia, like a lot of our political system is largely, you could characterize it as a balance of weaknesses, not a balance of forces. Like it's just that everyone involved is quite weak and doesn't really have a handle on things, doesn't have implantation in society, doesn't have mass movements behind them, doesn't have a credible project that people actually feel wedded to. And that's the same for the LNP as it is for Labor. I mean, probably even more so for the LNP. They don't have if they get in, they don't have a mandate for anything because they haven't said what they're going to do. So we're going to have this kind of like unpopular LNP government. And so, I mean, I think in that context, what is interesting is that the only party, and now I'm going to sound like a real Greens hack, the only party that's actually genuinely shifting things is the Greens, because we're the ones that, in this context, in this, defined context where, they boot out Palaszczuk and Miles comes in, like Labor are like the Greens are the pace setters. We're the ones like actually pushing a sort of a vision and a plan, and then Labor's kind of going, oh crap, we've got to hold them off. Okay, well, let's adopt this. Actually, that seems kind of popular. Maybe we'll take part of it. I mean, this goes all the way back to 2017 when we had been campaigning for the council election and the state election on the fact that huge property developers were donating enormous sums of money to both major parties, and we were saying, property developer donations should be banned. And then lo and behold, in around 2018, they banned property developer donations. They've since taken a lot of money from property developers, but at least they sort of like rhetorically they adopted it. In 2020, we were campaigning on a really, really bold renewable 100% publicly owned renewable energy transition plan that a year or two later we saw the Labor Party partially adopt.
And mining royalties.
And a mining royalties, like that's been our big focus for years now. And they come up with this, again, paltry version because it was a short-term thing that only when the coal price was super, super high did they actually take a decent royalty rate, and it's collapsed back down and it's back to shit again. But like regardless, rhetorically, they're adopting more and more. And to the point where 50-cent fares, that's effectively a fucking Greens policy. And now we've got to this point now where we're even potentially contemplating some kind of cap on rents. I mean, and like in that context, there's a pattern here. If it was just one off, you'd be like, well, it could be in some other dynamic. But like when you see this pattern emerge, it is that the fact that the Greens are the only party with some kind of vigor, some kind of like vision and some sort of momentum behind them that's actually dragging the Labor Party potentially in the right direction. I mean, and that's part of our strategy. Like, ultimately, we don't think Labor's going to be able to carry through the reform agenda that's going to really deal with all the crises. And so it will require a Greens government in the medium to long term. But in the short term, if we can force these kinds of concessions out of the major parties, let's bloody well do it. It's fantastic. Yeah. Yes. But it is interesting that they're implementing these things and people still don't. People are kind of like, my rent has gone up. I mean, look, if you're contemplating a cap on rent increases, right? Like, great, 4 weeks out from an election where you're probably going to lose, and you've had 3 years of rents skyrocketing, and you sat on your hands and you laughed at the Greens for suggesting caps on rent increases. Like, why should anybody reward you for that? So it's like, let's not oversell what Labor's doing here. And it's only because they're feeling super threatened in a whole bunch of really key seats that they know they'll never get back if we win them.
Yeah, but this is the problem, right, is that they are finally doing these good things, but on the door what you hear is people love 50-cent fares. They like the things that that the Labor Party is now doing, but they go, well, it's a bit weird that they only did it a few months out from the election that they were probably going to lose. And it's seen as, it's a going out of business sale. Yeah. They're trying to buy our votes. And it seems really like there's a really cynical approach to it, I think. And but the fact that, yes, the LNP in Queensland are supporting 50-cent fares is insane. No one would have believed that if you'd said that, 4 years ago when the Greens said, dollar fares.
I would have said you're insane.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. Yeah. And again, it is kind of sounds like a Greens hack thing to say, but that the major parties getting closer and closer together. But it's so true in Queensland that even the LNP in some ways follows Labor, like had sort of been willing to move on more renewable energy and climate targets, and a number of like even they voted in support of parts of treaty. They've since sort of backtracked on that, but the LNP and Labor are just adopting each other's policies. I guess the other interesting thing is, look at crime, and I'm curious to get your take on how this will play into the election, Liam. Like the idea of this youth crime crisis, Labor's adopted a bunch of LNP policies, removing the principle that detention should be a last resort for children, or criminalising breach of bail, or GPS trackers, all of those things. Yeah. But the LNP has kept pushing, said this is, basically their number one issue for the election is they're going to solve youth crime. Yeah. They're running adult crime, adult time is their slogan, mandatory sentencing for children and that sort of thing. And it kind of figures in the top 3 when you talk about Queensland state elections, like cost of living, housing, crime. Yeah. What role do you think that actually will play in the election?
That's a really good question. And it will change from seat to seat and suburb to suburb, right? Like it really... it's really varied. I mean, in the seat of Miller, like there are plenty of people who are worried about crime. And, like understandably, if you've experienced it or your neighbors have and you're afraid of people breaking into your house, like, of course, like that's awful and you shouldn't have to feel that way. But most people I chat to, like, I mean, Miller's a relatively progressive electorate, right? And they're relatively savvy, and most of the time you can talk about the fact that, look, if you just kind of increase harsher sort of sentences and penalties and stuff, it's not really going to, like, it's only going to make things worse, really, especially if you're not dealing with the social sort of drivers of the crime. And you could talk about those things and you normally get people agreeing with you. There is a layer of people who just kind of want a more disciplinarian society. They're usually older and relatively rusted on LNP voters. My instinct, though, is it is just sort of like a signifier for people of like this experience of a deterioration of stuff under 9 years of Labor. Like, I think it's one signifier that the LNP have latched onto that's really plays to their strengths. And even if people don't necessarily believe it or understand it or agree with it on a logical level, it's a good signifier for them to use. It's like handy for them to kind of articulate, like, things are getting tougher, life's getting harder under Labor, things are falling apart, they're not in control. And that's sort of like mobilizing what is like a relatively legitimate criticism, which is true that like Labor have made this homelessness is on the rise, our health system's declining, our education system's underfunded, but mobilize it to sort of scapegoat a small minority and then pin that on Labor. I feel like that might work nonetheless on a layer of people who just kind of want some reason to vent and to kind of punish Labor.
Yes.
Our job is to try to shift that and say, no, there's another reason why you're feeling like this, and there's a whole other framing of why you're feeling like this, and it's got to do with Labor and the LNP letting massive corporations get away with paying shit all tax, not funding the services, not having, social housing in the state has gone back 10% per capita since Labor got in, and then you land yourself in a housing crisis, and then there's all these people who are homeless, have to be put up in hotels because there's no place for them to go. I mean, that's a sign that they have fucked it and it's landed in this really bad place. But to articulate it on the basis of youth crime is just conservative framing that unfortunately may win them a bunch of votes. Our job is to try to, and look, I will say that all the seats that we're going for this election, the Labor ones that we're going for, and we're going after a bunch of LNP ones as well. All the Labor ones we're going after this election went to the LNP in the Campbell-Newman wipeout in 2012. All of them. And they're not going to go LNP this time. They'll either stay with Labor because the Greens' preferences will get them over the line because the Greens' vote has grown so high, or they'll go to the Greens, and I believe most of them, if not all, will go to the Greens. And I feel that is progress. That is our movement starting to actually change the dynamics of Queensland politics.
All right, there's your gold-clad predictions from Liam Flenady for the Queensland state election. Thank you again.
All right, let's just do another take, Liam, in which you say that we're going to lose half of them, and then we'll do another one.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll just run the correct
if I get
prediction.
I'm backing these, and if I get them wrong, I'm changing my name, I'm faking my death, and I'm moving to Cuba. So.
Okay, great. All right, well, we'll check in. We'll check in a couple of months and see if Liam's still in the country, or if he's about to be sworn in as the fucking member for Miller, which would be absolutely wild. I hope it happens. I'd love to see you in Parliament, Liam. That would be really great. If folks want to support the campaign, we will put links for your website in the show notes, and people can volunteer and donate and everything. This I think it's maybe even it's the next week or two the yard signs will be going up, so it's yard sign season. It's also only a couple of weeks until voting actually starts, so we will need people on boots for pre-poll and voting day. So if you're in or around Mill or any of the Brisbane seats, any Queensland seats, you should be doing that. Also going to put a link in the show notes where people can listen to your dank beats, your SoundCloud, Liam, and maybe we can put some what was your alias, Liam something? We can put some of that in the show to send you off perhaps.
Oh yeah. Oh good Lord. Please
All right, well thanks again, Liam.
I'm just mucking around, making some beats in between elections. Cheers. Thanks for having me on.
Beats to win, seats too.
Oh God. Thank you, Liam.
Awful.
See you, mate.
That's right. Call to action this week. If you can, please support the Queensland Greens campaigns for the state election, and especially Liam's campaign to win Miller. But if you're not around or can't lend your support to that, other thing that we would love you to do is to support aid efforts in Lebanon. Obviously, Israel is doing Israel and just bombing the shit out of Lebanon right now, quote unquote precise, or whatever the fuck they've called their attacks in the last couple of weeks. But yes, the warnings are that it is effectively becoming a second Gaza, a second, humanitarian catastrophe. The Union of Relief and Development Associations, URDA, does aid efforts in Lebanon, and we will put a link in the show notes where you can sling some money their way. Tom, you also have a call to action for Victorians.
Yes, Victorian Comrades, just a couple of things going on next weekend. On the 4th of October, Hung Trung, who's the Greens candidate for Fraser, the seat that I live in, is launching her campaign. I've talked about Hung before. She rules. She's awesome. If you're in Melbourne, in the western suburbs, you want to come along to the launch of the Fraser campaign, do that. We'll put a link for that in the show notes. And generally next weekend is a weekend of action. The local council elections of Victoria are coming up real soon. I think the ballots are going to start coming out. People are going to start voting really soon. So we'll put a link to the Greens events page in Victoria, which has a whole bunch of letterboxing campaigns for local wards all across the state that might need your help. If you've got a free weekend, letterboxing is easy and fun, and you could really help turn some local councils green.
Hell yeah. Please rate and review this show, Serious Danger, on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening now. Give us a 5-star review, and it really helps get the word out. Talk to your friends about the podcast. Get a whole group together to go down to Newcastle and or Sydney on the 23rd and 24th of November and come see us live. Get your tickets at seriousdangerpod.com. That's where you can also find links to a little bit of merch that's left, all of our social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. All those other good things. And as always, if you want to get in touch with us, send us an email, hello@seriousdangerpod.com. We'd love to hear from you. We love you so much. It's hard to put into words sometimes. So, it's not very good for a podcast medium.
Goodbye, losers.
Serious Danger Australia.